All right, well, we look at this. I really wouldn't be able to say that I'm actually running this organization if I can't talk to you about inclusion and diversity without a slide deck. I may go old school and just talk to you for a few moments. All right, so first of all, I would have started with a survey. You've heard a little bit about me, but I'd like to understand you as a group. So don't worry, you won't have to talk about this, and I'm not going to ask which company you're at. But I want to know how many of you are working at a company that is somehow involved in technology? Raise your hands. You're working in a company that does that. How many want to be? Lovely. Even better. Look, it's just like we planned it this way. All right, so talking about the organizations in which you are working or aiming to be I'd like you to think for a moment where they are on the journey. All right, and I've put it on a scale from 1 to 4. 1, it's early days. There's some awareness that we might want to have more women in tech. We want to be more inclusive, all the way up to 4, we have some diverse teams. We're beginning to feel the benefits. So I want you to think for you where you are with the company, and I'd like to raise your hand so I can get a sense of where I want to focus today. So how many of you, it's early days. Your company really hasn't started doing much in the way. Thank you for being honest and raising your hand. How many else? Raise your hand. It's okay, I'm not going to call on your company. How many of you, 2, you're beginning to do it? You've got some women's groups in place, etc. Oh, come on, I've been told Riga can be shy, but you're not that shy. Good, good, good. How many of you, 3? You're starting to do it. It's starting to get some things in place. Good, super. And then how many, it's there. You're feeling the benefits, it's great, you're sharing what works. Good, excellent. So we've got the whole mix, and we'll start working from there. Okay, so the first bit is a lot of stats, but the stats add up to good news. 10 years ago, really around most countries, if you were trying to get people to understand that there was no diversity in tech, nobody even noticed. 5 years ago, people began noticing, but there was a gigantic, so what? What does that matter? But what started happening around 3 years ago is we were beginning to get some stats. And what's exciting is if we look at the world of tech, it is not just that it's a good thing or it's morally, ethically right to have diverse teams. We now know, looking at the rapid rate of disruption, the way in which digital is growing, what you saw from Anna's talks before, that actually having a diverse team is not just a good thing to do, it is essential. And if you're not sure, if this is new to you and you need to go back to your companies to convince them that there is a business case, there's stats here. There's also a talk this afternoon at 1:30 that will really break down showing you. And it makes absolute sense from a business sense, from a societal sense. If digital is taking over the world, if every day we are creating new, exciting tools that are going to change how we do business, how we live our life, how we run our societies, we want to make sure that those tools, those services, those products are built to reflect the whole of society. There are some terrible news stories around when things have been designed without, for example, having women involved, and therefore it doesn't recognize women. There are medical apps that don't recognize or use the women's stats. But we have some great stories in which having a diverse team means the product that you're building is a better product because it reflects the whole of your user base. We have great stories where diverse teams are getting better in terms of return on investment. They're better able to move into new markets. They're better able to survive their disruption in their field, and that it is actually affecting profitability. So knowing that, we now know that we can go back into the workplace helping our employers realize this is not just a good thing to do. It's an essential thing to do and a stupid thing not to do. So to do that, what I was really intrigued, I was excited to come here. We've been doing this in the UK, and we're making some great progress on the Tech Talent Charter, which I will tell you at the end. But when I was invited by the embassy to come across and talking to Anna, the more I did my homework, the more I realized I'm coming here to learn as well. You're already leading across Europe in terms of number of women in the tech workplace. But I have to say, as Anna said in those stats, there's never a point of complacency. There's always more room to grow. And what we're doing in the UK is I now have over 400 companies, organizations, wanting to work together to understand how they can improve diversity. And the way in which we're doing it is to realize you don't have to figure it out by yourself. And the idea that there is some magic secret that you have to do is not the case at all. In fact, we know and we have examples from a range of companies that you can begin changing it by the time you get back into your office on Monday morning. So the first thing that I've got to say, anytime you start talking about diversity and inclusion, you will find you start getting that pushback. What does that mean? Does that mean men can't work anymore? Does that mean that you're coming to take the men's jobs? What are you going to do about that? And one way of flipping it, and I think the more powerful way of flipping it, is to start talking about inclusion. Building workplaces that welcome everyone. Make women feel welcome, but make everyone feel welcome. And by flipping that, you move away from what I'm hearing sometimes. In the UK, we are waking up that teams need to be more diverse. But what I'm finding is I have companies who are panicked, and they're beginning to talk in a sense of that I call the takeaway window. Quick, I need to hire some people. I need 3 BAME, 2 women. I need a disabled person and an order of chips quickly. And when you have that effect, as you'd imagine, even if they can find those people, they bounce through the system very, very quickly. And if you're not careful, you also have people that are already working in that workplace begin to feel, well, what about me? I've been working here for 5 years, 10 years, where is my part? So what I would suggest to you in the first instance is to flip the conversation, to begin talking about building inclusive cultures. And it is about making sure that everyone in the workplace feels they can bring their whole self to work. And we'll talk about that a bit more. Now remember, you're going back into business, so I can give you some stats. There was an interesting research piece done by Accenture this year, and what it found, all those stats I showed you at the first point that showed that diversity matters, what we're finding from a recent study is that it is the culture that becomes a multiplier effect. So those companies that are feeling some effect in terms of getting a more diverse team and getting that bottom line, once they really focus on culture first, then it really starts taking off in terms of innovation and productivity. So what we've got to do is always look at what we're going to do next. I love what Riga TechGirls is doing. I love seeing where we're building more and more women-focused groups that support women on that journey into tech. But we have to take that conversation further. It is about trying to look at how we make our conversations, and it's winning the why. One of the ways that I describe it is this. Sometimes I have to make a talk, and it is in front of a largely male audience. White, male, and stale is sometimes called. I don't say that. The way I describe it is this. Up until 2 weeks ago, I had a serious injury. I was in plaster. I spent 2 months in a wheelchair. This was an interesting idea for me to have to learn about inclusion. And what I would say is this. When you're talking to people on your teams that go, oh, inclusion, what does inclusion have to do with me? What you can say to them is this. If you are never going to get older, if you are never going to fall ill or be injured, if you are never going to have to look after children, if you are never going to have mental health issues, if you are never going to have to look after family, then yeah, sure, you might not need inclusion. If any of those things are possibly going to happen in your future, you need inclusion. And when we're talking to our managers that want to know the bottom line, when I was in the wheelchair, easily 20% of my time, any meeting, anything that I was doing, however great, 20% of my brain was always trying to think, how do I get out of the room? How will I find the loose? How do I get into that? When I was a working mother in an environment that wasn't female-friendly and family-friendly, I was constantly, 20% of my mind, juggling the logistics. How will I be able to pick them up? Will my husband be doing that? What will we be doing? If you're an LGBTQ person in an office that's not friendly, you're spending 20% of your time thinking, am I getting my pronouns right? Have I mentioned this? When you're not a represented group and you're working in an office in an environment in which it's not welcoming, your whole brain isn't working there. Every manager wants the whole of your brain. What if you could use all of your thinking, all of your creativity, all of your problem solving to be at work? That's why we say to employers, you have to change that conversation. It is about moving from that zero-sum game. It's helping them realize, and it's having these conversations. In your companies, I absolutely know the importance of policies. I absolutely support the importance of procedures. But we do more about inclusion. We do more about bringing people into that space through those corridor conversations. answering questions, creating safe places where people can begin talking and understanding what matters. We need to make sure that actually you are at a great percentage. You're amongst the top of Europe of having women in the workplace. And I'm talking to a largely female audience. So what I'm saying to you is when you're in the workplace, how are you looking to bring in other people? Not just women, not just middle class, not just white, not just able, not just your age group. We have to start looking and making an environment where everyone comes to the table, where we make this an opportunity. And it's also important to create spaces. My challenge to you, I love that you have a women's space in this conference today. In a year's time, I'd love it if every woman made sure we brought a man into this room. I'd love it if we made it a space that the men knew they wanted to be here because it was exciting, it was interesting, and they weren't afraid that they were going to have some angry women doing some men bashing in the environment. All right? This is about us leading on inclusion and making this as a space where we work together to find those solutions. It is then important when we have this, if in your company you are beginning to have women's groups, where are you looking for your allies? Where are you looking for your heroes? Those people that can help champion what is happening within your company. How do we make it feel that men are part of the solution, not just part of the problem? And data. I love that Anna opened with data. We have to measure. Something I would throw out to the government that you might ask for, the thing that ripped the plaster off everything for the UK and made it come forward was the fact that we had compulsory gender pay reporting. And what that did in making everything transparent is companies who were still thinking, maybe it's okay, maybe everyone's like that, really allowed that. By measuring what is happening in companies, by sharing that data and discussing what works and what doesn't work, the conversation begins moving on. All right, so let's pretend you've got your company to the part where the culture is great, everyone's bought in, you are ready to become a more inclusive company. We've got to start transforming how we're doing things. One of the things that I would say, it's great. How many of your companies have mentoring schemes? Yes? Good. How many of you have some unconscious bias training? Have you heard of that? A few. If you've not heard of it before, all of us, women included, when we look at things, we bring bias. It's how we process, and we look instinctively to find people like ourselves. If your company hasn't started that, start looking into that. But if you're already there, take the step further. Create those champions. Now, what I mean about how many of you got champions in your company? The interesting thing from mentor to champion, a champion is someone who is committed to work with someone, not just to give you advice and listen to the problems, but this is someone who helps us with the one thing that often happens in underrepresented groups: we have no confidence. So the champion is that person who says, you should go for that job. That person is the person who's at the top table saying, why haven't we considered her for this role? These champions are the people who are in the more represented groups, but are committed to moving the dial and being uncomfortable. So get your company to begin thinking about how you might do that. It is about making mistakes. What I've loved about in some companies is they talk about guerrilla inclusion. These are small groups, not at the top table, coming up with perfect policies. These are small groups in the company that say, actually, flexible working, let's try it in our team and work out what works and doesn't work, and then we roll it out across the company. It's another group that says, actually, let's try and look at something like completely rewriting how we do our recruitment process, learning in small ways and going through. And it's getting people used to the fact that you will make mistakes. I do hear stories about that team that does finally hire its first woman developer. And heaven forbid, it doesn't work out. And they don't, and suddenly you get people saying, why are we doing this? We're never going to hire another woman. But you never hear that when they hire a left-handed developer and it doesn't go well. No one turns around and says, you know those left-handers? I'm never, ever going to do that again. But it's allowing that sense of we're going to get it right, but we're sometimes going to get it wrong. And let people make mistakes. Let people say the wrong words sometimes and be gently corrected. It's making it okay on that product. The same energy in tech that we use for innovation of product and coding, we need that same sandbox approach in how we work on our innovation. And it is about doing things that are uncomfortable. Generally what we say is the first time people say, ooh, I don't know, we've not done that. That's probably what you need to do. One of the ways in which we'll say that, how many of you in your offices allow flexible working, remote working, and meaningful part-time? Can you raise your hand? Fantastic. Okay, this needs to become the new default. You're going to get a lot of tech teams, particularly ones that love their agile, that get very edgy, because if we can't do our stand-up and all hold our coffee and look at each other, that's not going to work. Rubbish. We need to start creating opportunities where remote working, flexible working, and meaningful part-time working become default. Now, before you say, oh yes, we do that for our returning mothers after they have the baby. Again, rubbish. It's not just for the mummies. There's some interesting stats. There's an organization called TimeWise in the UK that began doing studies. And what was really interesting, when we talk about meaningful, flexible working, we get these stats up here. If you can't see it, I'll read you some. Of course, 91% of women want flexible working, 84% of men. This is what's really interesting and why I talk about inclusion for all. Whenever I give a talk and I talk about things like parental leave, the women nod up and down, yes, we want parental leave. The men come up to me quietly and say, do you know, I really wish I could too. But as a father, if I took time off for work, it would be career suicide. This is about creating wins for all. And it also shows that when we look at flexible working, part-time working, and remote working, we have millennials love it, as do the Gen X and the Gen Y. People with mental health issues, people with disabilities, they have found they are more successful, they're more happy, they're more likely to stay in places. But this will be, when you start talking about this internally, this is uncomfortable. You will have that manager who says, oh, I don't know, that's not how we do things. This is where you go back to we're going to do what's uncomfortable, we give them the data, we innovate because it won't be perfect first, and we move on. Then, if you have, so some of you were saying you do have good culture, you've got some of that innovation, you want to look for more people. Anna was showing you stats that show you have more opportunities than people, and that's going to grow. You have more need for talented staff, and there's not enough people here. So what we have to do is go back to first principles on how we hire people. And we have to be willing to rethink it from the very starting point. One of the things I found interesting, I was working with a group in Canada. Canada had gone through and begun using more and more blind markers on CVs, you know, where you cover the university, you cover the gender, to try and make sure that you're really being fair in your process. And when they did that, one of them noticed it was starting to turn into what we call Swiss cheese. It was a CV with more holes than you would have expected. And what was interesting, instead of throwing up their hands and saying, well, what's the point? We'll just go back to the old way of doing it. They asked themselves, why are we using CVs for selection? Why do we not set a task, a common task for everyone, and make our first shortlisting? Another company, Thomson Reuters, was looking through their pipeline, and while they had a lot of women applying for jobs, they weren't making it to interview. Because they had data, remember we have to have data, they noticed when it came to the phone interview, it dropped. When they looked at it, they got more feedback that quite often when someone is not comfortable or confident, and often for women, what do we like when we're in conversations? We like that feedback. We like the eye contact. We like to get that, and we talk more. And what they found is when they stopped doing plain phone interviews and did it by Skype or Hangout, where they could see people, more women were making it through to the shortlist. So it is about trying to gather your data, look at what you're doing, and going back to first principles. It is about rethinking those screening, and it is about making, again, at that recruitment level, your champions. Why they're looking down and saying, why are we never getting anyone who is disabled applying for our job? Why, when we've done this, have we never had a woman apply for this? It is things like rewriting job descriptions. Most of you probably know this. If I write a really long advert with a dozen things that you have to do to come and work for my company, and I use lots of phrases like, you need to be epic at this, and you be able to be a cyber champion at that. If there's 10 things on the list, how many things does a woman need to see that she can do before she applies? How many? All or 9? Usually a woman, if she looks at a list of 10 things for a job and she cannot do at least 9 of them, she won't apply. I'm sorry, guys. How many do you need on the list before you apply for it? Half, 3 or 4. Some of the stats suggest that for many confident men, they only need 4 things on that 10 and they think, yeah, I'll have a go. So what we've got to start thinking about is how do we hire, how do we write our job descriptions? Do we really need all 10 of those things? Do we really need to phrase it in those ways? And then again, do what we do in tech. Innovate, test different adverts, test different job descriptions to see where you're getting that. Some companies use quotas for hiring women. I'm not suggesting that, but you've got to ask yourself, if your short list is not diverse, are you really getting the best talent? So quite often what we measure when we look at Tech Talent Charter is to see how diverse is your short list. All right, then the other thing, and I think this is where something like Riga TechGirls is so very exciting. If we know statistically that only a small percentage of women are doing degrees in computer science, and this has been going on for some years, this means there are vast numbers of the talent pool who never got those skills or training to get into tech. So the one thing that we're finding in the UK that is absolutely exploding and has so much opportunity for companies are in retraining schemes, returner schemes, career conversion screens. And it's actually, from a business standpoint, it is kind of a no-brainer. Yes, we would all love a bright, shiny graduate, and I've got nothing against bright, shiny graduates, but there's a lot of other things we have to teach them, as well as getting them up to speed as a developer. You bring someone in who already has the life skills, the work skills, and you teach them to code, you've got someone who can zoom ahead. There's a great story from BT, a telecoms company in the UK. And what they had a great retraining scheme internally. And so when they were going to design their chatbot, one of the leads on the team was someone who had worked for 15 years in one of their call centers. Now, as well as those technical skills, who better to understand the kinds of questions, the user case, than someone who had worked in the place? So what I would say is if you are in a company that is not actively creating either its own retraining schemes and definitely supporting things like the Riga TechGirls, you're missing a trick. If you look around this room of women who are already here and keen, if you look at how quickly Riga TechGirls has grown, you can know there's an enthusiastic, talented, keen workforce that you can be tapping into. Right, and that then comes down to, for those of you who are the companies that said, actually, we're there, and we're getting great people in, we're very diverse, the thing I would say is this: it's not enough just to be great in your own company. Because if you look at the stats that Anna was saying, there's not enough people in the talent pool. All right? So being really, really good at it in your company and treating it like a trade secret and not telling anyone what you're doing and not helping anyone else is, in effect, investing in a really expensive fishing rod and then going to the same leaky barrel that everyone is fishing in. It'll last for a while, but not really. So the thing I would say is this: if you are in companies that are doing amazing things in tech, you can see evidence. It's why you're bringing me across and I've come across. It's connecting. It's coming out of our ivory towers. It's companies working together who might be competitors to realize if we work together to make tech a better place for women, for other underrepresented groups to come and join, then you might hire them first, but I get them second. That we get more people coming in, and it's a magnetic effect. It's a multiplier effect. And so in doing that, it is interesting. What I have often found when we host events, even in really big companies, people don't know what's going on. Sometimes it's even as much a matter as getting departments to talk each other, but then it's companies. So that, for example, what's happening in the UK, because of what we would do with Tech Talent Charter on Monday, I'm in a place called Leeds. And in Leeds, we're setting up a working group that has, sitting around the table, the BBC, Sky, Channel 4, all right? Typical competitors. We have PwC and Accenture, people who don't normally play nice together. We have Lloyds Bank and HSBC, the people who often, in normal circumstances, are competitors. All of these people around the table are also around the table. We have an equivalent to Riga TechGirls, and we have a Tech Mums group. And what we're saying for Leeds is, how can we create an ecosystem for retraining. So if Accenture knows or Sky knows every time it does a retraining program, it has more than it needs, they should be signposting the other programs. And in fact, we have companies like Sky who are saying, we will retrain more women than we need. And then we will say, once we've hired ours, let's be fair, they get first pick. But there are also then these talented women that they're saying that SMEs and startups can hire because they can't do their own retraining programs. So what I'd say that this can mean within Latvia is look across Riga, look at things like Riga TechGirls. How can you begin coming together to share what works, to power things in a joint way that means even if it doesn't benefit your company today, it will help your company in the coming weeks, months, and years. And that sort of is where I would say, and you can see the journey that I would share with you, that where we are with the Tech Talent Charter. So if I say to you, 4 years ago, we came up with a concept that was the Tech Talent Charter. This was the idea that we would bring together companies, suppliers, recruiters, organizations like your Riga TechGirls to work together, to collaborate, to share what works and doesn't work, and to share data. That was scary, but they're doing it. In March of 2017, we had 17 companies. The government noticed us. They gave us some seed funding. If you roll forward now 2.5 years, as of yesterday, before I boarded my flight to come to Latvia, we were at 400 companies working across the whole of the UK. This is big multinationals like the ones I was saying to you, Sky, BBC, Microsoft, Salesforce, but it's also Cancer Research UK, it's Domino's Pizza. It's startups, it's SMEs, coming together, committed to moving the dial. And the way in which we've done this, and what you can see for things like Tech Riga Girls, the importance is having some group that has no vested interest. We are tiny as an actual organization. You talk about creating minimum viable products, MVP. I'm building an MVO, minimum viable organization. We're not here to be the experts. What we do is we convene. We bring together all of the companies to share with us what they're doing. So what we've created online is an open playbook of best practice. If you want to find out ideas on how to recruit, how to retain, how to change culture, we have what over 400 companies have shared with us. Now it sounds much sexier than it is at the moment. At the moment, it's a Google Doc, but we're just doing another hack day in 2 weeks to turn that in and improve the UX. We began mapping. Nobody knew who was doing what in the UK in the space, including the government. So what we've been doing is mapping. We have now mapped over 400 initiatives across the UK that companies can look and say, I want to do volunteering in schools. Who do I talk to? I want to get women onto boards. Who's doing that? And then we're gathering data. What we've been doing over the last month, we make all 400 of our signatories share data. How many women do they have in tech? What's the job role? Gender pay? Do they have policies? It's a data set that terrifies them, but we collect it, we protect it by NDA, we aggregate it and anonymize it, which then means you can turn it into a benchmarking tool so that companies can sit down where you're trying to get your company to wake up. When they say, well, what can you possibly do? You can say, we're in the bottom quartile. We're in the bottom of this ranks of where we're doing. But it's also a chance for some companies to celebrate and where they're doing really well. So that's all I have to say in terms of telling you what we're doing. This is our growth thing. And what I would say is this, and it's what I finally also love about Riga TechGirls. It's about action. If we're waiting for the perfect silver bullet, it's not coming. If we're working for a magic formula that every company needs to do, it's not there. But it's been exciting for me to come here. You're already ahead of the game. We already are hearing about the amazing work that is happening in Riga and in Latvia. How can you move this? How can you mobilize? How can you come together to make your individual companies more inclusive, more innovative? But equally, how might you then begin to lead the pack by coming together to collaborate and build this very exciting ecosystem? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Okay, do we have any questions for Debbie? Just raise your hand if you have any questions. No questions? Then she has done a good job here today then. I just have one question for you, Debbie, if you can just come back up onto the stage. if there is just one thing from this talk that you would like to just push out and get out there again to the audience, what would that be?
I'm going to be greedy and say two. The two things. One, retraining. All right, get involved, get in deeply with things like Riga TechGirls to think about how we can equip more women to get into the workplace, and two, really invest in this flexible, remote, part-time working, because again, the sort of talent pool you open up is enormous.
Yes, thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you.